Hello, welcome to Java Database Programming. Very briefly, here's what we're going to cover in the course. These are the main topics. First of all, I'm going to be covering how to install Java and MySQL for both the Windows environment and for the Macintosh. Next, I'm going to discuss how to use MySQL, such as how to create databases and tables, how to query a database, how to insert records, how to remove records, how to update records. Just everything that has to do with working with a database using MySQL. Next, I'm going to discuss how to combine Java and MySQL into one program, where we write a Java program that connects to a MySQL database and table, and then can perform all the standard functions, such as create, update, delete, and insert. Next, we're going to look at how to use MySQL with NetBeans. NetBeans is a popular open source integrated development environment for Java and also some other languages. And NetBeans makes it very easy to perform database functions within the IDE. So we'll be covering, again, everything from how to create a database to creating tables to adding data, inserting data, updating data, and removing data. Next, we're going to look at how to create a Java MySQL application in NetBeans. It's a very simple process, and it's much easier than trying to write the code from scratch. And then in the last chapter, I'm going to show you how to use a built-in database that comes with NetBeans called Derby, which can also be connected to Java very, very simply. And using the Derby database, you can have most of the functionality you have with MySQL without having to add in another database. Derby comes free with NetBeans, which is also free, so there's some advantage perhaps to using Derby. So those are the topics we're going to be covering in this course. So now it's time to go ahead and get started and move on to the first chapter where we're going to discuss how to install Java and MySQL. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to download the Java JDK for Windows. The main page for Java downloads can be found at the URL I have on my browser. Scroll down to where you see JDK download and then click that button. Then scroll down again. First, accept the license agreement, and then find the version of the JDK for your machine. I have an x86 Windows machine, so I'm going to pick that link. I'll save the file, and we'll wait here patiently while it downloads. So I'll select the executable file, and we're going to accept the defaults throughout all of the different selections. Notice the subdirectory where this is installing to. Keep that in mind. And then we'll sit back patiently and wait while the software installs. Okay, here's the Java runtime environment. We'll install that next. Looks like we're just about finished now. Okay, so at this point we can close. Our next step is to modify the path environment variable so that we can access the Java compiler from any subdirectory. So to do that, I have to go into Control Panel, System, Advanced System Settings, Environment Variables, and I need to edit my path. And you'll notice that I have an older version on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this version to the end. And you do that by typing a semicolon. But to make sure I have it right, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to bring up a command prompt window. We want to make sure we get the right version, which is JDK 1.7.0_21. So now we'll go back to our path variable, and we can type /program files /Java /JDK 1.7.0_21 /bin semicolon. Click OK, and then click OK, and click OK, and close out. You probably want to reboot to make sure that that works correctly, but at this point you now have the Java compiler installed, and you're ready to move on to the next lesson for Windows users where we're going to install MySQL. If you're a Mac user, you need to move on to the next lesson so that we can install Java on a Macintosh. In this lesson, we're going to install MySQL for Windows, but first we have to install Python. In fact, we have to install several versions of Python for all the different utilities that MySQL is going to use. So let's go to Downloads. We're going to select the first version, 3.3. We'll save the file. This process is the same for all three versions. We'll open the download, although it's still scanning for viruses. Now we can start the installer. Click Run. Click Next. Click Next. Then we'll sit back and wait while it goes through the process. And remember, we're going to do this twice more, for 2.7 and then for 3.2. Finish up. Now we'll do 2.7. Very same process, so I'll just let it work through. Click Run. Click Next. Click Next. Finish up. Now we're going to go look for 3.2. There it is. Find the download version. Here's the download version. Click Save File. Wait for it to finish scanning for viruses. Start the installer. Run. Next. 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 Seems like we've done this before. Click Finish. Now we're ready to go to the downloads for MySQL. MySQL.com/downloads, actually dev.mysql. Scroll down to Community Server. Find the installer for Windows. Two versions. This is the web version right here. Scroll down to where it says No Thanks. Then click Save File. It's a fast download. Start the installer. Click Run. It'll be just a moment here. Click Install MySQL Products. Click Execute here so we can connect and make sure we have the most recent version. Then you can click Next. Accept the developer default. We have all the prerequisites. So click Next and Execute. And then we just have to wait while it downloads and then installs. And this will take a few minutes. Now everything's downloaded, so we'll begin the installing. Getting close here. Click Next. Click Next. Accept these defaults. Then click Next. Type a password for the root. Then add a user. I just used my first name. And a password. Click OK. Click Next. Accept these defaults. And click Next. Click Next to go into the samples and examples. Click Next. Click Finish. Here comes the workbench. We're going to use that in the next chapter. And that wraps up this lesson on downloading and installing MySQL. In this lesson, we're going to install Java onto the Macintosh. So the first thing we need to do is go to the download page. Here it is. Scroll down the screen, accept the license agreement, and then find the Mac OS X download. Now we're going to sit back and wait for a while it downloads. It's going to take a minute or two. This download is not as long as the one from MySQL. So now we're going to open the DMG file, and that'll take us to the package. Double-click the package. Let's bring the screen over. Click Continue, then Install. You have to provide an administrator name and password. Hopefully I'll get the password right. There we go. Then we'll just wait for it to write the files out. And that's it. We can close, and we are ready to run Java on our computers. In this lesson, we're going to install MySQL on a Macintosh. To get started, we're going to go to the MySQL download page. Then we're going to scroll down, looking for the DMG archive. Scroll down again and select No Thanks to start my download. Unless, of course, you want to set up an account, then you can go ahead and do so. And then we're just going to sit back for a couple of minutes and wait for the download to complete. Now we're going to open the DMG file. First, it has to verify. Now we're ready to install the package. Double-click the package file. Now we'll go through the MySQL installation. We'll be accepting defaults for all of the prompts. Now we'll enter our password. And now we'll sit back and wait again as the installer writes the files for MySQL. This will not take as long as downloading the files did. And we're finished, and we have completed the download and installation of MySQL. The last step before we're ready to start doing MySQL and Java programming is to download the Connector J driver, which is the JDBC driver for MySQL that will allow us to work with Java. So the download page for Connector J is dev.mysql.com/downloads/connector/j. Once you're at that page, scroll down and you'll see you have two choices, either a tar archive or a zip archive. We'll choose zip. We can skip the login or sign up by just saying no thanks, just start my download. And we're going to open up with WinZip when we're finished. So what we want to do is extract this to a folder. It can be anywhere on your hard drive. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it in our own folder, which we're going to call Connector J. But actually, we don't need to see this. What we're going to do now is we're going to add this path to our class path environment variable. Control panel. Let me bring this window over. Click System and Maintenance, and then System, then Advanced System Settings, Environment Variables. Here's our class path. Edit that. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get that window so I can see it. There we go. Now, Environment Variables, class path, edit. So I'm going to add that to the end of my class path. So I'm going to hit a semicolon, then semicolon, C:\, Connector J, and then MySQL connector, and that's a -java -5.1.25. Okay, so back here, and then click OK. In fact, you might put a semicolon at the end, and then click OK, and click OK. Click OK, and now you have the class path set so that when we try to compile the Java program and use the driver, it'll be able to find it. So that wraps up this lesson on installing Connector J, and we're ready to move on to the next chapter where we're going to look at MySQL programming. In this short lesson, I'm going to show you how to create a new database in MySQL. So the first thing you need to do is load the MySQL Workbench. You can get there by pressing the Start button in Windows, and then under All Programs, select MySQL, and then you'll see the Workbench program under the MySQL folder. When it opens, you'll see a screen like mine. You see we have 3 different main selections: SQL development, data modeling, and server administration. This is not a course on MySQL administration. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about MySQL database administration in this course. Infinite Skills has a course on MySQL administration and using MySQL that you should look at if you're interested in some of those details. What I want to do here is just get a database and some tables up and running so that we can begin using Java to work with that data. So with the Workbench loaded, to create a database, all we have to do is come over to SQL Development, where your local instance is found. Right-click and start Command Line Client. You might be hesitant to use the command line, but it's really a good idea to get practice with that. Certain things you can do so much easier from the command line, and I think all programmers should be comfortable using the command line with any tool that they use. So start the command line client. It's going to ask for your password, so enter that. And then you'll get the MySQL prompt. To create a database is very simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a database called library. And in that database, we're going to create tables to keep track of a library of books. So to create the database, I just type create database library. And then if everything works out right, it'll come back and say query OK, 1 row affected. And then I can guarantee that it's working by using it. So I type the command use library, and that opens the database. And then it says database change, and I know I'm set. And so that's all you have to do to create a database. Now, to create tables takes a little bit more work, and we're going to cover that in the next lesson. But this is all you have to do to get a database set up and ready to go. So when you're ready, you can move on to the next lesson where we're going to create some tables, or at least one table, for the library database. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to create a table in MySQL using the MySQL command line interface. We'll see how to do this later in Java. So first of all, load your MySQL Workbench. Then when you find your local instance, right-click and start Command Line Client. Enter your password. Make sure you use the right database. Use library in this case. Then we're ready to create the table. First, let me go over the fields that are going to be in this table. We're going to call this table book, and it's going to consist of the fields that we want to keep track of for our books in our library. And that's going to include the ISBN number for the book, which will be the primary key, the title of the book, the author of the book, and its price. So now that we know those fields, we're ready to begin entering the command. So we're going to type create table book, then an open parenthesis. We start with our first table, which is the ISBN number. We'll make it a varchar 13, and it's the primary key. So when we're finished with that field, we type a comma. Then the next field is title. It's a varchar 50, comma. The author, also a varchar 50. Then finally price, which will have float 11. Then we have a closed parenthesis to close out the create command, and then a semicolon to let the system know we're finished. Hit the enter key, and our table is set up. And so that's all there is to it. Again, we just use the create table command with the name of a table, list each field with a comma, then close off the command, the last parenthesis followed by a semicolon. So that wraps up this brief lesson on creating tables, and we'll move on to the next lesson where we're going to see how to insert some data into the table. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to insert data into a table. So the first thing you need to do again is to open up the MySQL Workbench, open your command line client, enter your password, use your right database, and you're ready to go. To insert data, we use the insert command, insert into, and then our table name, followed by the keyword values. And then after that will be a comma delimited list of fields in the order that you created them when you created the table. So in this case, we start with the ISBN number. Let me put a book in here. There's the ISBN number. Now the title. Now the author. And now the price. Followed by a closing paren and a semicolon. And when it works correctly, you get query OK, one row affected. Let's do one more book. Need to be very careful with extra semicolons. We're just going to take that out. It doesn't affect our outcome any. And then the price followed by a semicolon. And that's all there is to it. So to insert data into a table, you simply have to insert into the correct table, followed by a comma, delimited list of values in the order that the fields were created in the database. So that wraps up this lesson on inserting data into a MySQL table. And now we'll move on to the next lesson where we're going to see how to query that table to retrieve data. In this lesson, we're going to look at how to query a database using the select statement. But I'm not going to get too deep into all the different variations of the select statement in this lesson. We'll look at it in more detail when working inside Java. This is just to kind of get you familiar with the MySQL environment. So you should have the workbench loaded. If not, go ahead and load it now. And when you get it loaded, open your command line client. Make sure you're using the right database. And then the simplest query is a select all, which we write select star from in the name of our table. So select star from book will return all of the fields for each record in the table. We can narrow the fields down by specifying them in a list, like so. Be sure to put a comma between them. And they don't have to be consecutive. We could say select ISBN, comma, price from book, and retrieve just the ISBNs and the prices. We can also use the where clause to specify particular types of data. For example, we might say select star from book where price is greater than 25. So you see when you do that, you only get one of the two books, the one that's greater than $25. So those are the basic ways to query data. And like I said, there are lots of variations to the select statement and lots of ways you can make much more complex queries. But again, the purpose of this chapter is to just give you an overview. So that's the overview of how to query data. We're going to move on to the next segment where we look at how to update data that's already in the table. In this lesson, we're going to see how to update a record in a table. In other words, how to change some already existing data rather than insert new data as we've done before. The first thing we need to do is get to our command line client. So let's start that. And we're going to use the library database. And let's take a look at our data first. And what we want to do is we're going to change the price of the second book. So the way we do that is we write update book, set the price equal, and we'll change the price to, let's say, $26.99. And then we have to tell it what record we want to change, where title equal MySQL and Java Developers Guide, and then a semicolon to close out the statement. And it says that one row is affected, so if we now turn around and do another select, you see that the price has changed. Let's do one more. Update book, set author equal to James Keogh, where title equals Java 2 database, programming for dummies, semicolon. Again, we want to see one row affected. So that's how you update data in a table using the update command. And with that, we're wrapping up this lesson, and we'll move on to the next lesson where we're going to learn how to remove records from a table. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to delete records from a database table. So the first thing you need to do, if you don't already have the workbench running, is open up MySQL Workbench. And then once you have that open your command line client. Use the right database. And then I've added a couple of records to my table. Let me show you those first. I added Head First Java by Kathy Sierra. There's actually more authors, but I was keeping it simple. $44.95, and then with that ISBN number. And then I added the Definitive Guide to MySQL, Michael Koffler, $49.99 is the price. and again with that ISBN. You delete using a where clause, just like we update. So for example, if I want to delete head first Java, I can say delete from book where title equals head first Java, semicolon, one row affected. Select star from book, and I'm down to 3 books. If I want to delete the definitive guide to MySQL by author instead of by title, I can do it like this. Delete from book where author equal, and then if I select star from book, I'm back down to my original 2. So that's how you delete from a table. You simply type delete from the table name, where, and then you provide some sort of criteria or some sort of match for the record you want to remove from the database. So that wraps up this brief but hopefully useful introduction to SQL programming. And now we're going to have a couple of exercises where we'll review what we've learned in this chapter, and then we'll move on to the next chapter where we're actually going to do SQL programming in Java. For this first exercise of the chapter, we're going to rebuild the book table. This time we're going to call it books, and we're going to add another table, publishers, to our list of tables. In the next exercise, we'll put some data into those 2 tables. So the first thing we want to do is start our command line client. Use the library database. And then because we're not going to use book anymore, we need to get rid of that. The way you do that is by writing drop table book. And now the book table is no longer part of the database. So now we're going to create table books, and we're going to rebuild that table using the same fields that we're going to add a field for the publisher. I'm going to type those in now. So now we have our books table. Now we'll create another table with a list of publishers. And for that, we want an ID, a way to uniquely identify each publisher, which is going to be a 3-character varchar. Really, I'm just thinking of a number 1 through 999, but I don't want to make it a number data type. I prefer it to be varchar. And then the publisher name, we'll make varchar 50. And then we need to know the city that the publisher is located in if we wanted to write a reference or something like a citation. And that's all we need. So now we have 2 new tables, books and publishers. And in the next exercise, we'll put some data into both of those tables. In the second and final exercise of the chapter, we're going to add some data to the books and publisher tables. So I've got the workbench running already, so let's open our command line client. Let me move that into place. Enter the password. Then, because I can't remember exactly what the order of my fields are, I can, but just to show you how, we can use this command describe books, and that will show us the order. So we're going to say insert into books values, open parenthesis, and we could put a space there if we want to. The ISBN number for the first book, followed by the title, followed by the author, followed by the price, followed by the publisher, which is a press. Close parenthesis and a semicolon, and we have 1 record entered. So we'll do another one, followed by the title, followed by the author, followed by the price, followed by the publisher. And we have 1 more this time, followed by the title and the author, the price, and then the publisher. Okay, so when you have an error, which occurs occasionally, just check your data, and I can see where I messed up. I added an extra 0 or made a mistake somewhere in the ISBN. So let's do it again. This time I'll make sure I get it right. Count the number of spaces. There we go, I added an extra 1 at the end. The title again. The author. The price. And the publisher. There we go. Now we also need to insert data for our publishers. So let's describe that. So we have an ID and a name and a city. So the first one is A-Press, and they're in New York City. The second one is Prentice Hall. They're in Upper Saddle River, New Jersey. So we'll put that whole name there. And then finally, we have McGraw-Hill, and they're in New York City. Okay, so we can do a select star from books, and there's our books. And we can do a select star from publishers, and there are publishers. So that wraps up this introductory chapter on using MySQL. We're going to move on to the next chapter where we're finally going to look at how to access these tables in this database using Java programming. In this chapter, we're going to begin actually connecting Java to MySQL. And in this first lesson, I want to simply test our connection to make sure that our driver is working. So we're going to write a very short Java program called test connection. First thing we're going to do is create a JDBC object or instance. So let me write out that line. So that's class.forName, open parent, open quote, com.mysql.jdbc.driver, close quote, close parent, .new instance, semicolon. And actually, let's put this in a try catch. So we'll try. And if it's successful, we'll just print out the message connected to MySQL. Otherwise, if it's not successful, we'll close the catch, close main, and then close the class. So let's save this file, go back to our command prompt, compile it, compiles successfully, and then run it. And we get the message back connected to MySQL. If you don't get that message, if you get the message cannot connect to MySQL, the reason almost has to be the fact that it can't find the driver. So go back and check your class path, go back and review the lesson on how to set the class path after you download connector J, and then you should be set to go. We're going to move on from this lesson and move on to the next lesson where we're going to see how to connect to a specific MySQL database. In this lesson, we're going to continue writing Java code, this time to connect to the database. And then in the next lesson, we'll actually execute some SQL. So let's get started. We'll call this program connectdb.java, and we begin by importing java.sql.star. So our class is called connectdb. First thing we do is declare a connection object, which we're going to need in several methods. That's why we put it at class level. Now we're going to define a constructor. What the constructor is going to do is it's going to load the JDBC driver in a try catch. So I'll go ahead and type out all that. Okay, so that's what we learned in the last lesson. So let's move on. The next thing we want to do is connect to the actual database, to the library database. So we're going to create a method to do that. And it's also going to be in a try catch. Let me go ahead and type out the statement to make the connection, then I'll come back and explain what I did. So to make a connection to the database, we call the getConnection method of the driver manager object. And we pass to getConnection 3 arguments. The URL to the database, so that's JDBC :mysql : localhost / library, and then the username and the password. And if that's successful, then it will make a connection. We'll write out a line of text to let us know that. And actually that needs to go inside the try, so let's move that. And then we'll write just a very simple error message if we can't connect. And that's it. So now we need a public static void main. Then we create a new connect object, call it CONN, actually a new connectDB object, and then we'll call the connect to DB method. And I need to change one thing. Method name should not be capitalized, so let's make that lowercase c. Minus any typos, we should be set to go. So let's save, compile our code, and there's our typo. Let me fix that real quick. Did it twice. Save it, recompile, and then run it. And we're good to go. So again, to review, we have a driver connection method in our constructor. And then to connect to the database, we call the getConnection method of the driver manager object. And we pass in the URL to the database, followed by the username and the password. And with that, we're connected. So now we're finally going to use Java to write a query to connect to the books table of the library database. And we'll do that in the next lesson. In the last lesson, I showed you how to connect to the library database. And in this lesson, we're going to extend that program so that we can actually retrieve some data by doing an SQL query on the books table. So open up the connectDB program that we started in the last lesson. Scroll down to just below the connect to DB method, and we're going to create a new method there. Execute or exec SQL. We're going to put everything inside a try or a try catch. First thing we do is create a statement object. To do that, we call the create statement method from our connection object. Next, we create a result set. The result set will store the data retrieved from a query. You'll see that right here, because we call a method called execute query with our SQL statement. In this case, select star from books. So the retrieved data is now stored in the object rs. Once we have a result set, then we can simply loop through it. And next will allow us to loop through the result set until it's out of data. And then we'll just write out some of the data that we retrieved from the table. And for that, we'll call a method called getString to get the different pieces. You'll see that when the method is actually executed. And that's all there is to it. So we'll close out the while loop, close out our try, add a catch. Then we need to scroll down to our main method and add a call to the exec SQL method. Now we should be ready to go. So save the file, to recompile. And there's two fields from the data, the ISBN number and the title. Let's modify that just so you get a feel for this and add one more piece of output. Let's put the operator here. Like so. Save. Back to our command prompt. Let's clear the screen, recompile, and then run. So now we see the ISBN, the title, and the author. Notice the author is bumped up against the title. So let's add a space like that. Try it one more time. There we go. And you didn't have to use a space. You could have used a comma or some other delimiter between the fields. So to review what we just learned, to actually connect to a table and display data, you create a statement object, then you create a result set object, and the result set object is created from an SQL statement, select star from books. Then once you have your result set, you can loop through it with a while loop, calling the next method to retrieve the next row or record. With the result set, we printed out each individual field by calling getString with a number. The number represents the field number. The first field is 1, the second field is 2, and so on and so forth. And that's all we had to do. Now, it also is advisable, of course, to put that in a try-catch, so that if there's a problem with connecting to the table, you'll at least know that there's a problem. Later in the course, I'll show you some more specific SQL error messages you can place in these catch clauses of these try-catch statements. And we're going to move on to the next lesson where I'm going to show you how to update data in a table using Java. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to execute an update statement in Java. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our connectdb.java program and copy it to a new file, updatedb.java, so that we can work with that file. So let's do that first. So now that that's copied, we're ready to open the file. So we'll open it up with Notepad. And the first step would be to make the changes to all the different references to ConnectDB. Change those to UpdateDB. So the class name and the constructor, that's all in the class definition. Then in the next part, in the main program, where we create a new object, we need to make those changes also. With that finished, we're ready to move on to the section of the code where we change from a query to an update. So that's in our exec SQL method. First of all, we're not going to create a result set now, so we'll comment that out. And what we're going to do instead is call the execute update method. And it returns a single integer, or an integer. Returns 1 for success, 0 for failure. We also don't need the while loop anymore, so we'll take that out completely. All that's left to do now is write the update statement that we're going to pass to the execute update method. So on the line above, we'll write string update equals, open quote, update books, set title equal Java, how to program, 3rd edition. That's the first part of the string. I'm concatenating the string just because it's so long. And then we'll do a plus equal, ISBN equals, and then the ISBN number, 978-013, and then 5 2s, 2222204. Close quote, and then a close semicolon. Everything else can stay exactly like it is. It's one of the nice things about running SQL in Java. So we'll save the file. We have a try catch to catch any errors. We could work with the integer return if we wanted to, but we don't need to for this example. We'll know if it works because we'll run a query after that. So compile the program. Now, notice we forgot to put the update into our query. So let's add that. There we go. Save the file. Now we're good to go. Back to the command prompt. Compile again, and then execute it. Looks like it worked. All we have to do to tell that it worked is run our query program. And you'll notice Java How to Program 3rd edition. So to review, an update is executed using an execute update method. So you pass it an update string that includes an update statement. The execute update method returns an integer, but you can also put it in a try catch to check for success or failure, which is probably a better idea than just using the return value of the execute update method. So that wraps up this lesson on updating a database using Java. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to insert data into a table using Java. I've gone ahead and started the program called InsertDB. We're going to do interactive input, have the user enter the fields before we insert them. So I've imported java.io.star so that I can get buffered reader and input stream reader. The first few methods are like they've been for our other programs. It's only down in exec SQL that we need to look at the differences. You'll see I've created an input object of buffered reader type. And then I've also already written the string for insertion. And I did that because it's fairly complex with a lot of concatenation and a lot of special syntax, like concatenating a open quote, comma, open quote. So in order to make that easier for you to watch and easier for me to input, I went ahead and pre-wrote the statement. So now all we have to do is input the values that are going to be inserted into the database table. So the first thing we're going to do is prompt the user to enter the ISBN number, and then create a variable for that and get it from readline. Next, we prompt for the title, then the author. Next, the price, and we have to do a little special trick for the price. So we read it in as a string, and then we convert it, just like that. And then finally, the publisher. Let's take a look at our insert statement one more time. So we insert into books values and then an open parenthesis, add the ISBN in single quotes, the title in single quotes, the author in single quotes, and now I just discovered something. We do not need to put price in quotes since it's not a string. So we're going to take that out, the single quotes. Let's get that right. There we go. Like that. And then the publisher in single quotes. So hopefully that's correct. We'll find out when we run the code. If not, we can fix it as we go. So we'll save. Oh, I should also mention that when we run the insertion command, we do it through execute update, just like we did an update. And it will return the number of rows of success. So we're only going to try to do one at a time. So we're just going to say if inserted, that's the value returned from the execute update method, is greater than 0, then write out successfully inserted one row. So let's save the program, come back to our command prompt, compile, and then run it. So our ISBN number, we're just going to type in a pretend book. So I enter 13 digits. Then the title, we'll just call it Java DB Programming. I'll be the author. We'll say the price is $29.99. And the publisher, we'll just make up a company. And we successfully inserted one row. You'll notice I also had it bring back to me the output, just so I could take a look at it. Everything looks correct. So, one more time, you insert by creating an insert statement concatenating values into quotes or non-quotes, separating by comma, depending on the data type of the field. And then you call execute update with your string, and that's all you have to do to insert. So that wraps up this lesson on inserting data. We're going to move on to the next lesson where we're going to delete a row from a table. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to delete a row from a table using Java. So, as I did in the last lesson, I've taken the insert DB program and modified it to become delete DB. So I've changed the name of the class to delete DB, changed the constructor to delete DB. I'll finish up down here, make all of our changes here to delete DB from insert DB. Now we're ready to concentrate on the main part of the program, which is in exec SQL. We're going to prompt the user to enter a title, and that title will be what we're going to delete from the table. So there we prompt the user to enter a title, read the title in, store it in a variable. Then we build our delete string, which says delete from books where title equals, and then a single quote. And then we concatenate the title, and then we concatenate a close single quote. Then let's write it out just so we can look at it in case we have a syntax problem, which I don't suspect. Then we call the execute update method with our string, delete, and it returns either success 1 or failure 0. And if it fails, we'll get an error executing SQL more than likely. So with that, we're ready to run the program. So let's save it. Now let's compile. Looks like we made a very simple syntax error. Declare title. Easy to do. Save the file. Clear the screen and try it again. One more little typo. You get these a lot when you modify code, which is why, again, I like to leave these in so you can see the mistakes that are easy to make. Now let's try it. Now before we run it, let's run ConnectDB, which has our basic query to select all the rows from the table. So let's delete Java DB programming, which is the one we just inserted. So let's call delete DB. We could have used system.out.print instead of systemout.println, but that's all right. Not worth changing for that. So here's our SQL statement. Here's our result. We can verify that by running ConnectDB again, and you see that we have successfully deleted the row from our table. So to review, this was very simple. We prompt the user to enter a title, store the title in a variable, concatenate the variable into our delete statement, which is a string, call the execute update method with that string, and it will be successful if the string was created correctly. So that wraps up this lesson on deleting rows from a table. And now we're ready to move on to the exercises for this chapter, where we're going to revisit using Java to do simple queries, updates, inserts, and deletes, but this time, rather than from the command line, we're going to create a graphical user interface to perform those tasks. In this exercise, we're going to demonstrate how to create a GUI application, a graphical user interface application that connects to our MySQL database. The code is somewhat complex, so I went ahead and wrote it in advance, and this time we're just going to go through the code, as we'll do with the other exercises, and I'll show you how everything works, but I'm not going to actually type it in. There's just a little bit too much here to do that. So we start off with our import statements, the abstract window toolkit, swing, SQL, and util for several different things. Then we create some objects that we're going to use for the graphical user interface, JButton, JList, a JText field, and then of course a connection object. Our constructor makes sure that our database driver can be communicated with. We do that. Then the next method is create GUI, and here we set up our graphical user interface and generate some SQL data. First we create a container object, then set the layout to flow layout. Then we have a statement object, a vector to store some data. Then we write a very general SQL select query to get the titles from the table. We're going to store them in the vector. Go back and look at book list. That's a list. We create a list from our vector, store it in book list, and then create a scroll pane for the list of titles. Next, starting on this line, we create a button to get a specific book title. Then once the user's clicked on that, we write an SQL statement to get just that particular title, get the fields for that title. Then for the 5 fields, which are declared going back up as text fields, we set their text to be the data from that particular title. In this next section, we're simply laying out the panels. So we have 2 panels, one that has our book list scroll pane, the other part of the panel has our button. And then in the second panel, that's where we have our text fields that display the text for that particular title. Then we set the size of the window. Then we display the graphical user interface. We have a connect-to-DB method that connects to our table. Then we have an init method that calls connect-to-DB. Simple enough. Then our main method creates a display table object, creates some code so that we can close the window. Then finally, we call the init method and then create GUI method. So let's go back to our command prompt. We'll compile this and then run it. Let's put the window in view here. And if we click on a particular title, we get the title that we're looking for. That's a sample piece of data right there. So that wraps up this first exercise in writing a GUI just to display book data. Now we're going to move on to the next exercise. I'm going to show you how to insert new data into the table. In this exercise, I'm going to demonstrate how to insert a new record into our table using the graphical user interface. For the most part, this example is exactly like the previous example. I've changed the name of the program to insert record. So that's the name of the class. But everything else is the same, except for the section that we added. So I'm going to scroll down to that. Here's our insert book button right here. Let me back up first and show you a couple of things. Of course, we added a new button, insert book button. And we also added a JText area to store any error text that we might have. So those are a couple of new things. We also have a new method called load books, which is similar to what we did before, only here we're simply putting it in its own little method. So create GUI works similarly, and then we call the method load books to load our scroll pane with the set of books. Then we have our get book button, which works like it did before. And then our insert book button, which all it does is it goes into the graphical user interface and gets the data from each text field for the ISBN number, the author, the title, the price, and the publisher. Let's make one change right here. Then when we're finished, we take that string and execute an insert. So we're inserting into books. And then in our error text, we'll display a message if the row was inserted successfully. In our Setup GUI section, now we have 3 panels instead of just 2. And in the third panel, we add the error text. Then we add the 3 panels to our container, set the size, and then set its visibility, the same ConnectedDB method, the same init method, and then our main method simply creates an insert record object instead of a display table object from previously. Then we call init, and then we call create GUI. So let's go back to the command prompt and run that. We'll compile it first. Then we'll run it. Then we put the program in view. We can get a book title, just like we did before. And then we can insert a new book. So let's try that. We type in the ISBN, and then the title, then the author. Except actually, let's change that. It's author, then title. And then a price, and then the publisher. When we're finished, we click Insert. We get the record inserted correctly. Notice we have a background message also. And if we scroll down in our scroll pane, you see now that's part of that, and we can select it and get the title and get all the information about it. So that wraps up the second exercise where we've demonstrated how to insert a new record. Now we're going to move to the next exercise where I'm going to demonstrate how to delete a record. In this exercise, we're going to modify our graphical user interface program so that we can delete a record. This one will be fairly simple. First thing we need to do is add a delete button object to our program. Also, you'll notice that we've changed the name of the program to delete records, so you'll need to make changes where appropriate for that. We added a delete button object. Scroll down to after the insert button, and here's our code for delete button. It's very similar. We instantiate the object, create an add action listener where we have our SQL statement to delete based on a title selected from our list that we've already generated. And then once we've created the SQL, then we call the execute update method to execute the SQL. So this code looks very similar to the code we've used before. Make sure that you add the button to the panel, and that's really all we need to do. So let's compile it. Let me clear the screen, and then run it. Let's add a dummy record and then delete it. So we'll insert, and it's inserted. Now let's pick the book, and then let's delete it. It's now deleted, and if you go back through our titles, we have the titles that we started with, and the one that we inserted in the last exercise, but this book is no longer there. So with that, we've wrapped up this exercise on deleting records, and we're going to move on to the last exercise where I'm going to demonstrate how to update the data in a particular record. For our last exercise of this chapter, we're going to add an update feature to our graphical user interface application. So the first thing I did was add a update book button object or a declaration. Then, of course, we changed the name of our program to update records, so make sure that you make all those proper changes. Now let's go right down to the update procedure, which will be down below delete. There it is right there. So we create a new button, update books. We might actually call it update book, which is fine. Everything else is the same as before. Then we build our SQL statement, which is quite a bit more complex because updates are more complex. So that's just a matter of sitting down and getting the details correct and probably debugging a couple of times to make sure you got all your single quotes and commas all in the right place. It took me a time or two to get it exactly right. But anyway, we're updating by setting all the fields where the title equals the title that we set. And all you have to do is go into the interface and change one value. I'm going to show you how it works in just a second. Then we finish off by calling the execute update method with our SQL update code, or the string. And then, of course, we remove all the books and then load them back in again to the title listing. Finally, make sure you add the button into the panel. Don't want to forget that point. And then we're ready to go. So let's save our program. Let's go back to our command prompt. Let's compile the program. Now we'll run it. Let me bring that into view. Let's just pick one. And let's change the price. So it's $35 even. Update book. We have our message. Let's go off it. Then let's go back to it. And you'll see that the price changed. So our update function works perfectly well. So now we have created a complete GUI application with all the functionality that you'd want. We can add new records, update records, delete records, and display records. It's kind of clumsy using the swing tools to build the interface. And I do want to tell you that in the next few chapters, we're going to look at a better way to create a graphical user interface database application using the NetBeans integrated development environment. And that's coming up in a future chapter. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to install NetBeans on a Windows platform. First, navigate to the website, netbeans.org. Then we want the 7.31 download. Let's get the full bundle, although we probably won't use all of that. Click Save File here. All right, we're just about finished with the download. Just a few seconds left. We can click on the file to begin the exe. So again, we wait while it does its thing. Here we go. All right, so click Next here. Accept the terms and click Next. We'll go ahead and install JUnit, though we're not going to be doing any unit testing. The defaults here are good. That is the location of our JDK. You got to make sure that's right, but it usually finds it correctly. Glassfish is a built-in application server. We want that. Now we'll install. Another sit back and wait. Okay, we're getting close to the end. So hang on, hopefully these last 2% will go fast. Okay, looks like we're finished now, so we'll hit finish. And that wraps up this lesson on installing NetBeans. In the next lesson, I'm going to go through the process of starting up NetBeans and then connecting it to MySQL. So we'll see how to do that in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to start NetBeans and connect it to MySQL. So the best place to start would be to close the Start page, click the Services tab. Where you see Databases, right-click, and select Register MySQL Server. Type in the password for the root user. Move over to Administrative Properties. Now for the administrative tool, we're going to go find that in the MySQL folder. So go to Computer. Now how you find it can really be up to you. Program Files, MySQL. Let's open up Workbench. And we'll click Workbench and open. Click Browse. This time we need to back up. Double-click MySQL Server. Double-click Bin. It should be MySQL right here. Click Open. There we go. I'm actually going to change the administrative tool also. Let's go back to MySQL Server, the bin, and let's do MySQL Admin. That's a little more general tool. That's also the path to stop the command, so we'll go right to that. And right here, type uroot stop. That will allow the root user to be able to stop. And click OK. Right-click and select Connect. And we are now connected and ready to go. So in the next lesson, we're going to use this tool to set up a MySQL database and table. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to create a table using NetBeans in MySQL. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that the Services tab is selected on the project start page. Your database's services may or may not be expanded. Go ahead and expand it. The one thing you want to do is make sure that your MySQL server instance is running. Right click. If start and connect are grayed out, then it is running. If it's not, then click start. It will ask you for your root password or the user password. Enter that. So once that's connected and started, we want to expand. Then right click on library. That's our database. And then select connect. Enter your root password or whatever user you're using. Then click OK. Then you should have an instance for that database down below for instance connection right here. Expand that. Here's your database library. Expand library selection. Under tables, right click and select create table. This first table we're going to name books. So I'll type in books. And then I want to add a column. First column I'm going to add is the ISBN number. It's going to be varchar and 13. I'm making it varchar because it's not really a number. So we're going to work with just varchar. It is a primary key. So we'll select that and unique gets selected also. Then click OK. Wait a sec while it generates the information it needs. Click add column. Our second column is author. It is also varchar. And we'll just set it to 30. It's not a primary key or any other selections, so we click OK. Add another column. Title. It's also varchar 30. Click OK. Add another column. Price. Let's set it to float. And you'll notice when we do that, we cannot set the size. That's a system set size, but it will be plenty large for book prices. So click OK. And then we want to select publisher. Select varchar. And 30 is fine for the size, however you want it to be. And that's all we need for our books table. So click OK. Let's create one more table, a very simple one. We're going to call this table Publishers. Then we're going to add a column. The first column we're going to add is ID. We're going to make it a small int, and it's a primary key and unique. And click OK. Next we'll add publisher's name. It will be varchar, and we'll set the size to 30. Click OK. And then we'll make city be our last field. Select varchar. Again, I'm just picking 30 for the size. And click OK. And so if we expand tables, we should see our two tables that are there. And with that, we'll move on to the next lesson where I'll show you how to enter data into these tables. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to add data to a table. So of course, you need to make sure that your MySQL server instance is running, that you have a local instance to the library database. And you want to make sure you have your books and publishers tables, which we created in the last lesson. And by the way, if you want to look at the structure of those tables, you can expand both of them. And there you'll see the different fields. Let's collapse them back. And if I want to add data, say to the books table, we right click and select view data. And what that does is that brings up a automatically generated select statement, followed by a result set, which has nothing in it. But from this result set, we can begin adding data. So let me show you how. If you move to the tab with the little plus in the bottom to insert records, that will bring up a blank record. So here we're going to type in an ISBN number for a book. Then we'll enter the author's name. I'm just going to enter the lead author this time. And then the title. And then the price. Try to make sure you click correctly. And then the publisher. When I'm finished, I click Add Row. It brings me a new record. Type in the ISBN number. Over to the author. Then to the title. And you'll notice up above the title for the last one was blank. We're going to go back and fix that. Price is $39.99. And the author is Prentice Hall. First, let's add this row. Let's go back here. Fix that title. and then click OK. All right, so the problem with the data is that the title was too long for the field. All right, so there's our data. Let's fix it. And it should be okay. How can we tell? Close the screen, come back, and view data again. All right, so obviously the field is just too long as it is. So here's what we're going to do. Let's select it, and let's just put in a very small amount. We'll do it like this. Select Commit Records, should put it in there. Close that screen, hit View Data again, and there's our title. If you need to delete a row, you can do so by highlighting it and selecting Delete. And you've seen already how we update. We simply highlight the row that we want to update and then select the field and then make the update. So using NetBeans to edit, to insert, update, and delete is very, very simple. And I encourage you to use that often just for setting up very simple databases. In the next lesson, we're going to move on and talk about creating a graphical user interface for the books table. In this exercise, we're going to write select and update statements inside NetBeans shell. So the first thing we have to do is connect to our MySQL server. So you'll probably see your services tab look like this. Expand databases, right-click MySQL server, and click either connect or start. Either one works. The next thing we want to do is connect to our library. So right-click on library, click connect. It asks for the password. And now you'll see we have a connection instance down below. If we expand that, we find our library database, expand that, and we have our tables, views, and procedures. To write an SQL query, open the tables, right-click, and select Execute Command. In the editor, up above where the cursor is, we'll do select star from books. And then to run it, we hit this button right here that says Run SQL. And when we do that, it will bring up our rows of data down below. So now that we have a window open, we can write any sort of SQL we want. So we could write a where clause and then execute that so that only one book shows up. Anything we want to do. So that's how you can query your database using this command editor, if you want to call it that. Now let's do an update. Let's change the price on one of the books. So we're going to change the price of the Java How to Program book, $41. I'll tell you what, let's make it $41.99. So our update is update books, set price equal $41.99, where title equals Java How to Program. Hit the Run SQL button. It says executed successfully if you look at the output window. So let's erase that command. Type a select statement. And there you'll see that the price has changed. In this exercise, we've successfully executed 2 SQL commands. We've seen how to do a select statement, and we've seen how to do the update statement. In the next exercise, we'll do insert statements and delete statements. In this exercise, we're going to do an insert and delete in NetBeans. So the first thing we need to do again is connect to the MySQL server. Then we need to connect to our database. It's going to ask us for the password. Open up our instance, open the database, open the tables, right-click on books, and select Execute Command. And then let's just take a look at our data again. So let's insert a title, which we're just going to make up, into our database. So we type insert into book values, followed by an open parenthesis. And then we'll just do a ISBN number, the author, let's call it DB Programming. Its price is $19.99, and the publisher is McGraw-Hill. Then we'll type the Run SQL button, take a look and make sure that our command was executed successfully, and it seems like it was. So we'll go back and check it by running a select query and run. And there's our title. So it's in correctly. Now let's do a delete. We'll delete the same record that we just created. So delete from books where title equals DB programming. We need to get that space out of there. Got to be exact. So that looks good. So we'll execute the statement. One row affected. Come back and run our select statement again. And we're back down to just our two titles. So that wraps up this exercise on using the SQL editor to write SQL statements in NetBeans. And with that, we're going to move on to the next chapter where we're going to learn how to create a user interface for our database and table using NetBeans. In this chapter, we're going to work with MySQL to ultimately create a Java MySQL application that will allow us to create new records in a table, update those records, delete the records, and retrieve records, also called a CRUD application. So we're going to do this in MySQL, so we need to make sure that MySQL is running, so make sure that's the case. Make sure you have a connection object, which we have. And then in any of the databases you want to use, I'm going to use my library database. We're going to create a new table. We're going to right-click and select Create Table. We're going to call this table Students. And we'll add our first column, which will be a ID. And we'll make that varchar size of 4, and it's the primary key. Add another column for the name, varchar 50. And let's say this is a residential college only, so we're going to keep track of their dorm, that's their address. And then we also want to know their major. So we'll have that be the last field, major, varchar, say 25. So once we have all of our fields defined, we'll click OK. Let's expand. Then let's view the data. Of course, there isn't any yet, so we'll create some. So select Insert Records. Let's expand that field just a touch. I'll have to type that in again. There we go. Then for the name, and for the dorm, Rogers dorm, and the major, English. Click OK. Let's insert another row. Call this dorm Smithfield, and the major, computer science. And that's enough. So we have 2 records. That's enough to work with our application. And so with that, we have created our table and added data to the table. In the next lesson, we will begin creating our Java application. In this lesson, we're going to begin creating the Java MySQL database app using the Students table. So continuing where we were in the last lesson, go back to the Projects tab. Select File, New Project, Java and Java Application. Select Next. We'll call it Student CRUD App. Then click Finish. Right-click and select New JFrame Form. Call it Student Viewer. And the package can be anything, org Students Viewer. And then select Finish. Then under org Students Viewer, select New Other. Under Swing Forms, select Master Detail Sample Form. Select Next. Call it Students Viewer Form. Select Next. Find your database connection. Select your table. All the columns are correct. Select Next. We do want to view this as text fields. So select Finish. Right-click the file to view it and click Run File. Bring it into view. So you see if I click on a record, it will come up in the text fields. We can create a new record, delete, refresh, and save. So we have the full functionality. So for example, if Jane changes her major to math, then I can click Save, and now Jane is a math major. If Bob Jones changes his dorm to Humphreys, I can make that change also. I can add a new record very easily. So So with that, we've seen how easy it is to create a Java MySQL application using NetBeans. The next step and the last step is to turn this from just a internal NetBeans application to what's called a NetBeans platform application that will have the full functionality of a regular application just like MySQL or any other program. And we'll see how to do that in the next lesson. The next step is to turn our app into a NetBeans platform app. So to do that, we're going to go back to New Project and select NetBeans Modules and NetBeans Platform Application. Click Next. We'll call this Students NetBeans App and click Finish. When it completes, look for the Modules section of our new app. Right-click and select Add New. We'll call this Students Displayer. Click Next. For the code base name, call it org.students.crud.displayer and click Finish. Right-click the Students Displayer, select New Window. For position, change that to Editor, and then select Open on Application Start. Select Next, and let's call this CRUD Displayer Top Component. Then select Finish. Give it just a moment here. Now go to the original Student CRUD application, Student CRUD app. Select Properties. Select Packaging, and what we want to do is make sure that the Copy Dependent Libraries box is checked. And it is, so we can click OK. Now do a clean and build for the application. Compile everything, and that's going to make sure that our jar files are created. That's what we need to be able to take what we created in this app and move it down to our NetBeans platform app. Now, go to Students Displayer, right-click, select Properties, and select Libraries. Select the Wrapped Jars tab. Select Add Jar. Now what we have to do is we have to find our application. Here it is, it's Student CRUD app. So click Open, double-click DIST. There's our first jar, the Student CRUD app jar. Select it, go to Add Jar, double-click the lib folder, and then select all of the jars in that folder. Select Open, and then OK. Now we're almost finished. The next step then is to make sure that our top component is chosen. And notice we didn't have to call it CRUD Displayer Top Component because Top Component is added automatically. But we'll leave it like that. That's okay. We're not going to ever reference that by name. We want to take a scroll pane and add it in because we're going to move our master detail form into that. Our window has to consist of something, and the scroll pane is a good component for that. Now that we've done that, go to the studentsviewerform.java file and then drag and drop it over the window, and that puts it in place. And then we should be able to come down to our NetBeans app, right-click, and select Run. And here's our application. Let me fit it into our viewer here. There we go. A little bit too wide. Let me narrow it a little bit. There we are. Here's our data. We have all of our functional buttons down here at the bottom. And you'll notice at the top we have a complete set of menu items, just like any regular application, especially a NetBeans application. And with that, we've wrapped up this lesson on building a NetBeans platform app using Java and MySQL. And that wraps up this chapter on building Java MySQL database applications. In this chapter, we're going to build a Java database application using NetBeans. And that will include a graphical user interface for working with the database. So we're going to start a new project. It's a NetBeans module category, and it's a NetBeans platform application. So select those and then click Next. We're going to call this Books DB Manager, even though Books is actually a table. That's okay. That's the name of our project, so it's not that important what the name actually is. So we'll wait a moment while that creates. Now that that's built, the next thing we need to do is make sure we have a connection to our database table. So click Services, take a look and see if you have a connection. I currently do, but let me demonstrate what it would look like if I did not and how we would set that back up again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this instance, disconnect it, and then delete it. And then I'm going to disconnect from the server. So if your services tab looks like this, if you expand, right-click, and hit Start, then you should be connected. Right-click on Library, type your password, click OK. Now you have an instance down below. Expand that, expand Library, expand Tables, and you can expand Books just to make sure that everything looks correct and everything's there. So I'm going to bring it all back a little bit. Go back to your Projects tab. Next thing we want to do is start a new project. This time it's a Java class library. And we're going to call this Books Library. And it looks like it's been used before, so we'll call it Books DB Library. And then click Finish. The next step then is to create what are called entity classes. And an entity class is a mapping of database table to our Java application so that it'll know fields and metadata about the table. So with the Books DB library highlighted, we want to do New File. Then you want to click Persistence, followed by Entity Class from Database. Then select Next. Pick your database connection. Click Books. Hit Add. We're not going to do Publishers now, so hit Next. We need a package name. Package name can be anything. Let's just say Books DB. And then select Finish. And the next thing we want to do is right-click the project, come to Properties down below, select Packaging, and select Copy Dependent Libraries, and click OK. Then one more time, right-click and build the Books DB library project. Type Control-2, then expand Books DB library, expand dist, expand the lib. First, notice that you have a jar file, then expand the lib. And those are the three jars that our entity classes are dependent on. So with that, we've finished the first lesson in this chapter, and we're now ready to move to the next lesson, where we're going to continue by wrapping both the entity class jars into a module and also the supporting jars into a module. The next step then is to wrap supporting jars and modules also. So under Books DB Manager modules, right-click and select Add New Library. Browse. I'm going to move up one. Under your Books DB library, you should have a dist, then a lib folder, and in that will be 3 jar files. Select all 3 by holding down the Control key and selecting them. Click Next. Project name should be Eclipse Link, and that's fine. Select Next. For the code name base, type JavaX Persistence, and then select Finish. This next module is going to be from our MySQL client. For the third MySQL module, we need to get the MySQL client jar. So to get that, we're going to find it in the NetBeans project. So click Browse, go to Computer, C Drive, Program Files, NetBeans, IDE, Modules, EXT, and then MySQL Connector Java Bin, and select. Click Next. The project name is fine like that. Click Next. Actually, let's change the project name to MySQL Client. Then click Next. Then type for the code name base org.apache.mysql, and then click Finish. And with that, we have the supporting jars wrapped in modules we need. And that wraps up this lesson, and we're ready to move on to the next lesson, where we're going to begin building the IDE. In this lesson, we're going to go on to the next step, which is to design a user interface. The first thing you need to do is expand Books DB Manager and look for the Modules node. Right-click and select Add New. We're going to call this module Books Viewer. Click Next. The code name base is org.books.viewer, and then click Finish. There's the module that's created. Right-click and select New Window. For window position, drop down. Let's wait till it's ready. You see a progress bar down below. That's telling us when we'll be ready here. So it's going to take just a moment. Now, select Windows Position drop-down and pick Explorer. Before you move on, select Open on Application Start, then click Next. Select Books Viewer as the class name prefix, and then click Finish. Let's adjust our screen a little bit. Now, under Controls, find the Text Area control, drag it over to the Design window, size it, about like so, and we'll use that to display results. Now click the Source tab, find the constructor for this class. Here it is right here, and there's room. Now we're going to type some lines of code. Let me type them in, then I'll go over them real quick. We won't try to retrieve all the books, data, just some of them. And you'll notice that we have a few errors in our code. That's only because we haven't set dependencies yet, which we're going to do in the next lesson. But the code we've written here will enable us to retrieve data from the entity classes that have been mapped into our database table to show all the books in the books table. So with that, we're going to move on to the next lesson where we're going to finish up by setting dependencies and then running the prototype using the user interface that we just designed. In this chapter, I'm going to show you how easy it is to build a database application using NetBeans once you have the database in place. Let's take a look at the database again. We'll be using the Java DB. We have a connection already. Let's make sure it's open and connected. And here it is. If you look down, you'll see it here. If we want to view the data, we can view the data. We have 2 records. Now to create what's called a CRUD application, create, read, update, delete, we're going to go back to projects, select new project, Java for categories and Java application, then click next. Let's call this Books CRUD app. CRUD again for create, read, update, delete, and then click finish. Right click and select new, and then select JFrame. And we'll call this Books Displayer. And for the package, we can call it org.books.displayer since it's more in line with our app title. And then click finish. Right-click the app and select New and then Other. And then select Swing GUI Forms and Master Detail Sample Form. And click Next. We'll call this class name Books Form and click Next. It asks us for our database connection. Right there. We only have one table, so it tells us the table name and the columns to include. We want them all. So select Next. We want text fields, so we don't have anything else to do, so we'll select Finish. Now we'll wait while it goes through its process, creating the master detail form. And there it is. Notice we have columns for all the fields, and then we have text fields to display and to update. We can see it in action by right-clicking on the booksdisplayer.java and selecting Run File. I'm going to bring that into view here. I'm going to take it a second to load. Then come back and select Run File for booksform.java. Let's bring that into view. There's our application. If we click on a record, it comes in. We can make changes to it. Then click Save. And now the price has changed. We could add a new record. Then click Save. Now it's part of our record. So with that, I've demonstrated how to very simply create a database application that creates a master detail form and connect it to a database without actually doing any coding. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to turn this into a NetBeans app, which will give it a little more practicality and make it easier to then distribute that program to other users. In this lesson, we're going to be creating a NetBeans application using our Books CRUD app as a basis. The NetBeans app gives us more flexibility in how we can distribute the application to other users. So let's get started. We're going to create a new project. It's a NetBeans module category and NetBeans platform application. Select Next. Let's call it Books NetBeans Platform App. Then select Finish. Hold on while it generates code. Go to Modules and right-click and Add New. We'll call this Books Displayer. Select Next. Code base name will be org.books.crud.displayer. And then select Finish. Open the module, Open Source Packages. Right-click on org.books.crud.displayer and do a new window. Editor for window position and open on application start. Select Next. The class name prefix will be CRUD displayer top component. Then select Finish. When that's finished, go back to the original app, right click, select Properties, go to Packaging, and make sure that the Copy Dependent Libraries box is selected. We're going to need that as we build the app. It is, so we'll select OK. Go ahead and clean and build the app. For the next step, go to Books Displayer, select Properties, which is off my screen, then select Libraries, select Wrapped Jars, Add Jar. Now what we're looking for is the Books CRUD app folder. That's our original folder from our original application. And then inside that will be the dist folder, dist. Double click that. You should see a Books CRUD app folder. Open that. Select Add Jar again. Double click the lib folder. And then select all the jar files in that folder. Select Open. Then select OK. That's good. Now, back to our top component. We need to add a scroll pane. So drag a scroll pane in, drag it to the size of the window, or close to that, like so. Go to our master detail form file, books form Java, and drag that into the component. Drop it in. We should be ready to go now. Select our NetBeans platform app and run. Give it just a second to get started here. Here it comes. Let's fit our application into our viewing window. It's going to take a second to get that there. There it is. A little bit too long. There we go. And notice we now have a fully functional NetBeans app, which means it's an app that can run from any operating system, certainly Windows or Mac. We have menus across the top. We have our data. And we have the create, read, update, delete functionality that we had with just a regular Java Derby app. But now we have it in the NetBeans platform. And with that, we've wrapped up this lesson and wrapped up this chapter on working with the built-in Derby database and Java.